out of the 50 largest housing markets in the U.S., only 8 are actually favoring buyers right now. And one of the ones on this list may surprise you. This comes from a recent report by Realtor.com. It's titled 8 Metros Where It's a Buyer-Friendly Housing Market. This is according to their market clock, a proprietary clock written by Hannah Jones. This article talks about this market clock that Realtor.com has come up with. And what the market clock is it tracks markets, well, just like a clock. You've got the early recovery period right around 1 p.m. A balanced market sits at 3 p.m. A buyer's market's at 5 p.m. and a seller's market's at 9 p.m. So right now, according to the clock, most of the U.S. is considered balanced at 3 o'clock. And there's only a few that are buyer-friendly at 5 o'clock. So all this talk about how the market's going, but if only roughly 16% of the actual U.S. market is a buyer's market, what is it really telling us? Well, what is a buyer's market, first of all? So basically, there's more homes for sale than there are buyers. So buyers have more negotiating power. Typically, in a buyer's market, you have more inventory. Homes tend to sit longer on the market. There's price cuts. And basically, buyers are in more control than sellers. They can negotiate price, repairs, and terms, and so forth. Think of it as more supply than demand, so buyers have the leverage. All right, so Realtor.com named 8 of these buyer-friendly markets. I'm going to go through the list and tell you the 8, and then I'll talk about them. Well, let's start with number 1, Miami. Number 2, Orlando, Florida. Number 3 is Tampa, Florida. Number 4, Jacksonville, Florida. Number 5, Atlanta, Georgia. And then we have number 6, Austin, Texas. Number 7, Nashville, Tennessee. And then number 8, Riverside, California. So Riverside in the Inland Empire in Southern California. Interesting that it made this list. Now, this list is 8 out of 50 housing markets. So that's only about 16% of the top 50 housing markets. Now, these are major metros, don't get me wrong, but it is only 16% of the top 50. Let me talk a little bit here on Riverside, California, if you're not familiar. So it's considered part of the Inland Empire, as I mentioned, in Southern California. It's about an hour east of Los Angeles. Riverside went through a bit of a post-pandemic boom type of market, like many others like Miami and Tampa, Austin, Texas, and so forth. And the story with Riverside is a lot of buyers sort of left Los Angeles for affordability reasons and found Riverside as a popular destination. But, you know, in recent times, I guess inventory has risen, demand's cooling a little bit there. So you can have a market like that, you know, even make this list just because of how big it's gotten. It exploded after the pandemic, but now it's shifting towards more of a buyer's market as you get more and more inventory. All right, so I want to get into why these markets flipped in the first place. Well, it starts with inventory. Okay, we talk about this a lot. Inventory rising, more listings, homes sitting longer on the market, and it gives buyers more options. Okay, and when you have that type of market, it forces sellers to adjust, which creates price cuts. Obviously, less bidding wars, but it creates price cuts. And so sellers kind of come back down to reality and they realize, well, my house is just not going to sell for the price I'm asking in these particular markets, so I have to bring the price down. So that's where you see why in these markets you get these price cuts. There are sort of, you know, look, I won't have the time to get into each and every one of these. I may do a bonus episode on this, but local pressures, you know, you can get into them. I can talk about the Miami angle for sure. You know, condo inventory is rising. If you look at condominiums in South Florida in general, in Miami, Inventory rising, their HOA costs, insurance costs, all that increasing, older buildings, right? All of that causes hesitation on the part of buyers because they see these rising costs. Now, there may still be demand for the product, but when costs go up like that and supply of the inventory goes up at the same time, well, that's tough, right? That's definitely going to create pressure. And so buyers are going to have an edge in markets like that. Now, look, this tells me, if I'm going to just zoom out a little bit, it tells me that most markets are still pretty balanced. Even some sort of leaning towards a seller. There's not a national issue here. This is just a local sort of shift happening in some local markets in very specific locations. So make sure you don't let anybody tell you that there's this one story about the U.S. housing market. To me, the U.S. housing market is more diversified and localized than it's ever been before. There's a story in almost every market. So you got to dig into each city, you got to dig into each neighborhood to really kind of get what's going on. But just want to throw that out there, right? What does it all mean, right? What does it all mean? For buyers, like I said, more negotiating power, more time, leverage. And then for sellers, got to price it correctly. One of the big things for sellers in markets, in these specific 8 markets especially, you got to price it correctly. Your home, when you list it for sale, the house won't sell instantly anymore. The condition matters more. And if you're overpriced, the market's going to let you know pretty quickly you're overpriced. All right, so let's talk about what happens next. In all of these markets, all of these buyer markets, okay, what are we seeing? We're seeing inventory rising, okay? That's the main issue going on, more inventory. Whether it's new construction, whether it's existing home sales, that's what's going on in every single one of these markets. Now, Florida, Texas, markets like that, yeah, they're still pretty active. There's more supply. There is new construction going on in those markets. I mean, almost every single one of these markets have new construction. But it continues to hit the market, so it adds even more supply. And in the end, and that's important to note. That puts pressure on existing home sales and sellers of existing homes. Now, the other thing that stands out to me with a lot of these markets, international buyers. Okay, many of these, and Miami's definitely a standout in this, but they're all of them. I think every single one of them has some sort of presence when it comes to international buyers. Miami is a bit, I don't want to call it unique, but I will call it, it is the number one market in the United States for international buyers. At this point in Miami, 15% of purchases are foreign buyers. And that's a lot higher than the national average. And many of them are cash buyers. So yeah, you got rising inventory and all the new construction, but there's that support system from the international, global demand. All of these locations on this list have it. But you see how, like, one of them, specifically Miami, really has it sort of in a very strong way. All right, so the big question is, what's going to happen? Will inventory keep rising faster than demand? Will demand come back? Look, because in markets like this, you do have local buyers, they slow down, but you could have global buyers step in. That's the balance. We need to see how it kind of goes moving forward, and why I think this cycle is a little bit tough to predict. But Miami being the number one market for national buyers, I actually want to talk about that more probably in a future episode, maybe go through the whole list of where, we're seeing the most international demand, because you have to consider that. You have to consider that when you try to figure out where this is going and where it's probably going to go next. That is it for me today. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. And as always, if you have questions or need specific advice, ideas, or just some help regarding your particular real estate needs or situation, or if you're just looking to buy or sell real estate in Florida, well then DM me on Instagram at The Salib Group, or just send me an email to mark@thesalibgroup.com. Don't forget to leave a rating for the show, follow, subscribe, help others find the show, and be informed and educated about the real estate market just like you. Until next time.